Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our final public lecture of the spring semester at Roger Williams University School of Architecture, Art, and Historic Preservation. I'm Nathan Fash, Assistant Professor of Architecture and Co-Chair of Events, along with Andrew Cohen. And I'm very pleased today to introduce our speaker, Kevin Valk. His talk with us tonight is the second in the Distinguished Alumni Lecture Series here at the school. But before I introduce him, I want to special word of thanks to Edgar Adams for suggesting that we invite our speaker tonight as a distinguished alumnus of our school, doing great work that we're all very excited to learn more about tonight. I also want to say thanks to Heather Wilson and Kathy Poland, who are instrumental in helping us orchestrate announcements and logistics behind the scenes. It's been great working with you both. And thanks to my co-chair, Andrew Cohen, and special thanks to our dean, Steve White, whose support for the event series has been rock solid throughout the 4 years that I've been involved with it. Okay, now to our guest. After graduating from Roger Williams University with his bachelor's degree in architecture in 1996 and spending 4 months working for his mentor, Michelle Foster, Kevin moved to Portland, Oregon in search of something different. Within a short amount of time, he had found an opportunity that began as a model building task, but quickly turned into a full-time position. And now as a project designer and manager at Holst for more than 24 years, Kevin has been an integral part of the firm's growth and success. As design director, Kevin guides the overall design direction of the office, working with each team, providing guidance and support in meeting project goals, while also setting the tone for design as a priority in the office culture and professional development. His lecture with us tonight is titled Design Collaboration, Evolution and Experimentation at Holst. And collaboration is a concept often cited by architecture firms in describing their process and culture, but he'll be thinking about how does collaboration really work and how do we ensure that collaboration is a benefit to teams, to the work and practice, and not a hindrance. In presenting the work of Holst tonight, Kevin will share ways in which collaboration informs their evolving practice as a hallmark of the firm's new generation of leadership, and offer an honest assessment of Holst's growth, transition, and increasingly collaborative process, showing us examples of their recent work. Holst was founded in 1992 and doubled in size over 4 years prior to its transition to new owners, Kevin Valk, Kim Wilson, David Ott, and Renee Strand in 2017. In 2020, they were named the AIA Northwest and Pacific Regions Firm of the Year for outstanding contributions to the profession of architecture through their commitment to excellence in design and elevating the quality of the built environment. Holst is now the largest women-owned and disadvantaged architecture firm in the state of Oregon, with a renowned reputation for award-winning design, meticulous technical standards, and a pervasive commitment to social responsibility. Holst's work spans a wide variety of project types and sizes, including single-family residential, affordable housing, higher education, healthcare, and performing arts. Their projects are executed with a high priority for the client's needs, environmental and social responsibility, high formal and technical standards as well. Their intentional approach is really evident in the built work, as well as their process and the culture of the practice. And with that, please join me in a very warm, if remote, welcome for our guest, Kevin Valk.
Thanks, Nathan. I appreciate that. And trying to close the attendee window so I don't see how many people show up, as I told you. I really appreciate the opportunity to join y'all. This is definitely not something that's in my wheelhouse. I don't do a whole lot of public speaking, and I think I probably would have said no had this been in person. So the opportunity to do it via Zoom is great for me and great for our office, and we're excited to share more about ourselves and more about how we do what we do, and then some about what we do. And I know that's usually a sort of important part of some of these lectures, and people sort of very interested in the product. We're very interested in our product, but we're also very interested in our process. So we're going to share a lot about that tonight, and then get to a few projects at the end. So I'm going to jump right in. As Nathan said, we're in Portland. I think everybody is aware of that. We're an office of about 40 at this point. We do a variety of work, like Nathan mentioned. Most of our work is here in the Pacific Northwest, and with a bunch in Boise as well. We've done a little bit of work in other parts, including back in Amherst, a few projects that we collaborated with a developer and another architect back there, a few housing projects. But most of our work is really centered around where we live. And I think that that's somewhat important to how we practice. So here in this, in our first slide, this was taken just over a year ago when we moved into our brand new office, about 4 months before COVID. So I've got my Zoom background on our office entry now, because that's about as close as we get to it, although we're in the process of hopefully opening back up in a hybrid way next month. And so our staff is pretty excited about that. I'm probably more nervous about that than excited, but it'll be great to get back to a little bit of normalcy. So, we talk a lot about what we do, and, we don't talk as much about why we do it and sort of our mission. And although it's simple, our mission has evolved over time, which was, sort of started as just creating meaningful architecture, sort of evolved to creating architecture that people really love, and it continues to evolve to be more than just clients, but the communities and our neighbors, but also us, and things that we're proud of, both with how we work and the clients that we work with. So I'm going to be swiping across my iPad at times as well for some notes. So I apologize if I'm looking over to my side during the presentation a bit, but that's the way it's going to be. In this pursuit of meaningful architecture, we really have come to this realization that we as a group generate the best ideas together. It's not about an individual, it's really about our collective. And so from the beginning of Holst, it's been about the group rather than about a person. And so that's what we've been pushing forward in the last several years, and trying to enhance and making an even stronger part of our culture in the office. So, and although we sort of have always been known as a design firm, and we explore possibilities of design pretty intensely and relentlessly, and we try to push innovation where we can. Our reputation in Portland is really founded on being able to make projects happen, both on budget and on schedule. And when I started at Holst back in '96, the environment of working the environment for a modern sort of design architecture firm in Portland was quite different than it is today. There wasn't many of that happening, and most of the people looking to hire firms were very concerned about sort of what that looked like in Portland and how that got done within the confines of a budget and schedule, because Portland has always been a city that doesn't flaunt what it has, and people and as a city. And so they were somewhat reserved and calculated, and want to make sure that they're spending their money in the right way. And so we learned early on that in order to be able to do what we'd like to do and the type of architecture that we wanted to be able to practice, we needed to meet those goals. And so it's something that's pushed us ever since to continue to do that. So tonight I'm going to talk a little bit, in sort of three buckets of our collaboration. First about leadership, and then about culture, and then about projects. And so really the leadership is about the evolution of our firm and how collaboration has been a part of that, and how the transition in leadership has also sort of pushed that pushed that desire even further. So it's really about how we got here, what happened in the transition, and then how we've been improving the collaboration in recent years through several things that we've implemented across the office. So I think the first question is usually, why is collaboration such an important topic for us? It's a great question, and a question I think I usually like to head off with some sort of clear sort of understandings from where we come from. But our goal is always to create a process that not only brings diverse voices and people to the table, but engages them. So we want meaningful interaction, and so that in our work brings we've seen through example that brings out the best results. So, but it takes a lot of hard work, and so it's not just about collaborating with our client or with even the community, but internally, and in making it about a team rather than a smaller group of people that sort of staff up or expand as a project goes, and people do different things, and people are sort of stuck in their little their little roles. We like to include everybody into that early phases of a project. So and the biggest thing we've learned is it's messy. It's not an easy process, and it gets very, very, very messy, but we embrace that discomfort and some of those difficulties, and we think it makes us stronger, and we think it makes our project stronger. So but when it comes down to it, it's crucial. Collaboration is just crucial to what we do. It's the best path to innovation. It's the best path to career growth for the staff, which is key to our growth as a company and the growth of our client base and all that. And Holst has never been a firm that's talked about wanting to be a particular size. Growth at Holst has never been about, well, we want to be a big firm so we can do this type of work. It's always been about, well, we need to get bigger because we don't want to lose the people we have, and they need to grow, and so we all need to grow with that. And so we take steps to allow that growth to happen naturally and organically and as a group. And so the more growth we have, the more people can spread out and do different work, solve different problems, and expand their possibilities. And it's also the best way to get the projects that we want and the best projects that we see. So a brief history of Holst. As Nathan said, we started in '92. I joined in '96, which is that little X on the left. We've done a lot of work we're super proud of from that time forward. It took 10 years before Holst did the first ground up project. So we focused on a lot of interior projects, a lot of renovation work when we started. The firm was started by two gentlemen, John Holmes and Jeff Stewart. They started working together, and they created the name Holst based on their last names, a combination of the HOL from Holmes and the ST from Stewart. That's where Holst comes from. It's not it's in no way related to Gustav, if anybody's familiar with him, but that's where Holst came from. We've had pretty steady growth from '92 to about 2011, or maybe even 2008. It was about a person a year over that time. The recession came. Coming out of the recession, because of the way that we focused on both the diversity of our work and the dedication of keeping our staff around, which was, everybody sort of sacrificing to allow that to happen. We came out in a pretty strong place. We had a lot of experience still on staff. We didn't lose a lot of that. We were able to come out of that recession pretty strong, and we grew pretty quickly after that. Actually, in the sort of 4 years from 2011 to 2015, we doubled in size from 20 to 40 people. So, and then in 2017, the four of us got the opportunity to purchase the company as Jeff and John were retiring and wanting to do something different. And we took that opportunity on. We had been around for a while at that point and felt like we were pretty integral to how things were operating. So we felt ready. Of course, once you take on that task, you realize where you're not, and then you adjust. And where I think a lot of its growth and the sort of the things we're going to be talking about tonight comes from, on things that we saw that we could change and we could do better as a company. And so we've made a lot of strides to implement that. So we've continued to grow a little bit since the transition, though holding pretty steady. Like I said, we moved offices with the potential to grow more as we were kind of boxed in our old office. And of course, we kind of stayed steady over the last year with COVID, working from home. So we've continued to push for a diversity of work across our portfolio as well, which we'll get into. But prior to the transition, there was a few things that happened that were pretty important to the transition, and then in how we've continued to progress. And some of them are sort of pretty simplistic, but things that we hadn't really thought about as a company. But we realized that as we grew, became pretty crucial to how we were going to grow and making sure we're all on the same page. So we went through some strategic planning before the transition, with the idea that eventually that would happen. We set up an org chart, which I'm showing here on the left, and it's quite sort of an eye-opening experience, to be honest. When we sat down with the previous owners and we were going through that, where their minds were, and where those of us who had been at the firm for a while and the rest of the staff were, we realized that there was maybe a disconnect there on how everybody saw the firm operating, and in that sort of hierarchy of an office. And we always felt from, very strongly that the firm had operated in this sort of manner that there wasn't really a hierarchy. Obviously, there's ownership and there's experience and there's folks who do different tasks, but the reality is that we all work together. And I think we did that in some projects and we did it less on others. But we looked at this as an opportunity to really set where we wanted to go as a company, and less as where we were, and maybe a little bit of like where we wanted to move away from, but really where we wanted to get to. And this idea really puts the core values, which are on the right, of the company in the center. And so all of our decision making is sort of based on that. And we try to eliminate the hierarchy of ownership as much as we possibly can. And I say that with the understanding of there's still a reality to people who have ownership of a company and investment in the company, and we don't pretend like that's not there, but we try to make sure that we acknowledge that and do things to take that pressure away when dealing with project decisions or how we operate. So in addition to the org chart, those core values were something, and these are sort of evolved over time, and these are fairly fresh, but it allowed everybody to have a common goal or common understanding of where we were coming from. And then on top of that, we established a large group of committees. So we had an office of 40. We probably established, off the top of my head, maybe 8 to 10 committees through the strategic planning, everything from an infrastructure committee to understand like our, whether we could expand or when we could expand or if we needed to expand in our facilities, taking care of the IT work, a design committee that really helped guide some of our process, and even a culture committee that really worked on just how we interacted as a firm and as individuals and as a community. And so those are pretty crucial to how we operate now still. But it really took, it was a way to take responsibility and power away from, the head of, or, what somebody saw as the head of the company or the heads of the company, and bring it to the collective, which was the sort of the leading us into this path that we're on now. And then with that, we maintained, as I said, a sort of expanding our diversity of work. So back in 2010, although we thought we did a pretty diverse arrangement of work for the size that we were at the time, our largest built project in 2010 was 10 million. There's a renovation for a hotel that's in town that's since changed names, but still a great spot. And then in design was a $29-30 million Bud Clark Commons, which is a homeless shelter, along with transitional housing and other support services. And so that was in design at the time. Since then, our largest build project has more than tripled in size, almost quadrupled, in an apartment building that I'll show later tonight. And then we've got a performing arts center down at the Oregon State University that's under in design right now, and CDs, and estimated budget of about 70 million. So what that does is it allows our staff, as I had mentioned before, to grow and to spread out and get more opportunities and stay more engaged. But this also paired well, the greater sort of type of work allowed us to sort of push this evolution of how we operated. And so instead of a small group of people doing the upfront or early phase design work, and what a lot of younger staff in particular consider the design work of a project, although we push very much that design happens throughout a project. It allowed us to expand that and say, okay, we're gonna have teams where we can bring people together sooner. We can have more people involved earlier on in a project rather than later on a project. And we're gonna do a diversity of work so people aren't feeling like they're doing the same type of work over and over again, which can get pretty stagnant pretty quick. And people start end up relying on the same sort of techniques they might have used on a past project. And although we like to learn from project to project, of course, we're definitely not a sort of kit of parts, design office. We don't really reuse a lot from one to another. We try to sort of push boundaries on each one and find new ways to look at the solutions to a problem. So, of course, this takes some subversion of our own ego, and that's something we talk about a lot. And as the design director, it's something that I need to not only talk about, but I need to make sure that I'm practicing. And I'll be honest with you, when I first took on that role at the transition, that was very difficult. It was a role I was moving into for the first time. I had been a designer, but I hadn't been leading design as an office. I kind of felt like, okay, great, I'm here and I can take more of that on. And at the same time, realizing, no, I actually can't. I need to not worry about me as an individual and worry about the office. And so by practicing that, we can show the rest of the teams how that functions within their own collective as well, and is part of a smaller group and the larger group as an office. And we do that very delicately because, of course, I think we realize that ego also drives us to be better and to innovate, and it also probably drove most of us to get where we are in the profession and through school and all of those things. So it's a very delicate balance to try to sort of make both parts of that or of ourselves content. So, but the one thing it's not, and we like to stress this as well, and often comes up when people ask us how we do it, or they ask questions about the process. It doesn't mean it's a design by committee. So we have teams together that buy into common goals and work together towards common goals, might be working on the same sort of problems, but it's not a competition, but it's a quick come to a sort of an agreement on direction so that everybody can buy in. And if at times there's not agreement, that's sometimes where more experience or leadership comes in and has to provide better direction. And so that happens. And so it's definitely a more democratic and inclusive process, and we get better results with a wide variety of voices at the table. But it's not just because we bring more voices to the table that we get that. It's the work we put towards that, and then the understanding that there's still decisions to be made, and you're still I think some people sometimes like to equate it to, well, the more voices I have, that's great, because then it's easier to make a decision. In fact, it's oftentimes harder to make a decision than easier. but that's where that's where the work comes in. And so it's truly a situation where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And it's a little cliche, but I think that it's truthful and honest with where we come from. So I'm going to talk now about just about the culture of the office and some of the things that we do to really push the collaboration within our office. And then I'll talk about how that relates to projects themselves. So, and this has been happening. We've been pushing the cultural sort of the collaboration aspect for the last 3 to 4 years. And so, a few of the initiatives that we've sort of been pushing, we'll go through. But first, it's I think important to sort of understand where we come from and sort of some of the understandings that we have around it and the discussions we've had, and the biggest being that good things don't always come easy. Collaboration is a challenge. We're not hardwired necessarily to collaborate. I think there's definitely people who are more used to it than others, either based on how they went through their education or how they grew up or what have you. But it can oftentimes bring in these feelings of being threatened, both in sort of how you're working and what you're working on and what you're doing. Design is already sort of a very personal sort of experience, and you're putting that out there for others to sort of respond to, with whether it be clients or your colleagues. It's anxiety inducing at times. I know that I've gone through that, times where it's very sort of, there's a lot of fear that comes into it. And oftentimes that human nature doesn't, when that fear comes in or that anxiety, you shut down, you get defensive on what you've done, and none of those things help with that process. So we try to make sure we acknowledge that, and instead of pulling away from some of those feelings, we need to work to override them, and move towards the discomfort that comes along with it. So as we say, we embrace the difficult and the messy, and because we've been willing to acknowledge some of those things, we've even worked with some local consultants, including a local company called Deeper Funner that I've got their website down on the bottom, who's kind of brought some of this sort of human nature sort of idea to the table for us, and it's really helped us describe some of the feelings that people go through during the process and acknowledge that, and then be able to react. In a big part of that fear is being able to reframe the idea of failure. So, people I think get nervous because they don't want to fail and they want to have the right answers and the right solutions, and you can't do that. You have to be willing to fail in order to succeed. And I think that it's something that we talk about in the practice a lot, whether we're working from home or whether we're in the office. You're trying to get people to open up and put their work out there for eyes to see sooner rather than later. And I think I even saw this in school, and I see it still when I go to other schools locally to kind of either review things or teach. You see that fear, and it's like the fear of putting pen to paper, because you're either overthinking it, or you don't have a solution, or you don't know what's going to come out of that, and you don't want it to be inferior to something else. And it's about how we get over that fear, and how collaboration can help with that. So we've implemented a few strategies over the last few years, and so the initiatives, and I'm not going to read each of these slides individually, but essentially 3 initiatives that we've sort of broken out and we feel are pretty integral to how we operate. One is simply our community agreements. We've established some framework for how we communicate, but more importantly, how we repair bad communication or missteps in that communication. We know that those are going to happen, and so having tools that we can utilize to repair those is important to the communication and to our community. We've also implemented what we call the CDPs, or collaborative design process meetings, for lack of a better name, but it's essentially an opportunity for teams to have honest and open discussions with the entire team, from the partner in charge to, you know, the design staff and everybody in between, that you can set the framework for an open dialogue. They get scheduled regularly during the process of a project, and you can resolve issues. You can talk about what's going well and what's not, and really sort of require staff involvement to be part of in the commitment, which we've seen, which is pretty amazing. And then the other is in-house design conversations, and so both being what we call skull sessions or studio drop-ins, which are just really opportunities to share on different levels or different times of a project. And so we'll kind of talk through those. The first one being our community agreements. We initiated this process of establishing community agreements about 3 years ago. We started working with a different outside consultant just about diversity and equity, and it became clear that in order to have some of the difficult conversations that we needed to have, we needed some agreements in place that allowed us to sort of have an understanding of where we were going or where we were coming from, and how to be respectful in a sense, but also how to fix some things as they came up. So it's proven to provide a much better environment for the office. I think people feel more open to having conversation, but also more open to how to fix things when they go wrong. And no matter how perfect we all think we are sometimes, which seems to be a trait of the profession at times, we're not. We're far from it. And so there's conflict, and we need to repair that conflict so that we can have clear communication and open communication amongst the team. And if you lose that, then it's going to affect everything. It's going to affect your design process. It's just going to affect the environment at the office, and you want to avoid that, and you want to try to correct it or acknowledge it as soon as you can. So we've since gone through a second version of the community agreements, where we spent, to be honest with you, I think a good year sort of adjusting, having a committee kind of talk through where we were, what was working, what wasn't, and then we've created a new list of community agreements from that. So, and then through that whole process, the most important part of that was understanding how we would make decisions around the community agreements. And it was really about this idea of consensus and what that meant for us. And it didn't mean everybody needed to agree with every community agreement, but they needed to agree with the fact that they could see it as an appropriate tool and supportive of our common goals, which is to create a healthy environment for the office. So, and as we sort of talk more about it, and as we use them more, you start seeing the relationship of some of this sort of conversation about how we collaborate and how we work as a group to actually how we actually then design and do our work, because it's very similar in a way that as you work together, you can't get defensive about an idea on a project. You have to sort of take the bigger picture, look at the common goals for the project and the client's goals, and it can't be about the individual. It's got to be about the collective. And so it's very, very similar. And so you could start seeing the relationship both of how we work together and then how we work on a project. And it's pretty great when you start seeing those things come together. Of course, we saw different interpretations of the community agreements that we first had, and we're going to continue seeing that on the next ones. And that's why they're sort of an evolving process. And in another year, we'll probably start the process again. As we grow and as we have different people in the office, we'll go through it again, and we'll see what's working and what's not. And it's been a pretty great learning experience because you learn more about the others in your community and people you work with, and on a bit more of a personal level, and about what they are seeing with some of the agreements versus what you are. And then it's a pretty it can be a pretty powerful experience as well. So so the next initiative was the collaborative design process meetings. These were started a few years back, I think 2018. We saw the need as we started seeing conflict on projects, as we started pushing for having more people involved earlier in a project and changing staffing. We saw the need for basically a time to say, okay, let's take a step back and just talk about how that's working. And you know, some people react to it better than others, I'll be honest. In some ways it becomes a therapy session for a team. And I know that can put negative connotations into some people's mind. I look at that as a very positive thing, a willingness to be able to address concerns and address what's happening, and talk through it, and communicate on a more personal level than a strictly project level, although it's integral and crucial to the project. So of course, as I mentioned, like our staff buy-in is crucial to the CDP meetings, because for twofold. One is they're moderated by staff. So we have a committee of moderators who have chosen to take on this role. And there's about 10 or 12 moderators, I think, who are each assigned to a couple of projects that are in the office, not ones they're working on, but they can moderate. And that moderation kind of has evolved over time from taking pretty strict notes to being more of just guiding a conversation or prompting questions, and taking very sort of fluid notes with general ideas. We don't need sort of hard and fast sort of, or really strict notes on what was said. We can have an idea that can be shared then before the next meeting. The meetings happen every 3 to 4 months, so that teams kind of, it's not necessarily right before a deadline or right after a deadline, even though deadlines can often be where the sort of most turmoil can show up and the most stress happens, the most conflict. We've realized that if we don't sort of put them right after a deadline, people won't necessarily wait for that to resolve the situation. And anybody on the team can even request one if they feel like it's needed and things aren't going well somewhere. They can kind of request a meeting and we can organize it and get it going. So they've become pretty integral to the dynamics. And we talk not just about things that aren't going well, but also where things are going well. People get to talk about their own goals, things that they'd like to improve upon, so that can be in everybody's mind when people are working on different parts of a project. And again, you kind of get to know each other better and who you're working with. So, and these become a framework for all of our communications as we continue through the office. So, the next thing is the in-house design conversations. It seems fairly obvious, to be honest with you, of like, yeah, you're going to have conversations about where the design is going on a project. But we've taken it a step further so that it's not just about a project and communication amongst the team, but it's also about that project's sort of opening up to the bigger office. And so skull sessions can be short, maybe an hour presentation that's maybe over lunch or maybe over a happy hour, where people are sort of just looking at what other teams are working on and maybe giving some input, almost like a critique, that you might have experienced in school, that you're sort of opening up to the office, and you're getting, you can bring up a particular moment of the project and that's in design, or it could be details, it could be other things that you're learning. It could also be a lessons learned experience where people have done a skull session on where they are in the construction administration part of a project and some of the struggles that they've had through value engineering, which I think on the right is kind of a screenshot of one that somebody called VE Blues, where you're having to make hard decisions, and they were kind of sort of getting some input from others in the office. They're not mandatory by any means. They're kind of open as you're available, which allows us to schedule them as as necessary, as opposed to getting everybody together. And then we've also been doing this studio drop-in series, which are a little bit more of a working session where people kind of get their hands dirty in projects a bit more. For example, we do a fair amount of affordable housing work. With that work, there becomes a lot of sort of upfront design studies that goes towards fundraising. And we happen to be right now, in particular, the Portland Housing Bureau is getting ready to dole out some funds that they have from a bond. There's always a lot of competition for that. And, you know, we're on a bunch of client teams looking at different projects, and then, you know, you're submitting some design work, and you're there so they can understand their pro forma and other things. And we've used these studio drop-ins then as an opportunity to sort of lay the groundwork for those projects. And so instead of saying, okay, here, myself or even one of my partners, you know, here, do some, you know, we'll do some quick design work and we'll get that, you know, out to the client, and that'll be the first direction that we go in. We utilize, you know, the input from a larger team to give some direction and some thoughts, and then we'll share that with the client at times. Sometimes we'll, you know, we won't, but it depends on what we get and where we are and what's necessary through that process. But it's become a place where, you know, people can really open up and they can get some experience just presenting. So I think, as you know, as I've grown in the office, you kind of forget that people need opportunities to learn how to present sometimes in front of a group and get some of their discomfort out, kind of like I'm doing today. You know, you learn how to put yourself out there in front of a group, and, you know, and your staff needs that sometimes. And sometimes people come from other offices where they're not used to being part of the design process. And, you know, that gets them more used to it. They're not used to presenting to a client. This gets them more comfortable with that. And it also gives people who are maybe not in that phase of, you know, an early phase of a project, and they might be on a project that's a 2-year construction, you know, timeline, and they're pretty strictly doing CA. This gives them an opportunity to engage in other parts of the office. And although we try to limit that to where, like where somebody's on CA, we're finding opportunities as well on other projects that they can get involved in, as long as time permits. But this is just another opportunity for that. So it really allows people to feel like a bigger part of the office, and then and aware of what's happening throughout the office, and not so pigeonholed to their project or their team. So as an example, or some tools that come out of that, or some things that we talk about through that process, in comparing a little bit of, not necessarily of how we worked before, but of how we've seen things evolve and how we know things can work at times. And just 3 examples of them are, you know, this sort of idea of the best idea, and then the idea of the best idea wins. We used to talk a lot about the best idea wins, and that was our way of talking about how we collaborated, which was a much more competitive aspect of, okay, here's a new project, here, you 3 people, and I'll even say you 3 guys, because to be honest with you, that's where we were at the time. You know, come up with ideas, and then we'll get together and we'll present those separately to the client, and we'll let them choose. And that was an idea of collaboration. And you know, to be honest, it wasn't a fair collaboration. It wasn't a fun collaboration. It wasn't really collaboration. It was just competition. And although I participated a lot in that, and that's kind of how I learned, and I learned to be a designer, and I grew, and I got some great things out of it. It's not a way to collaborate. And so we're being honest with ourselves that it's not about the best idea wins. It's about finding the best idea for a project at that particular time, for that particular client, for that particular site. It's also acknowledging the fact that it doesn't mean it's the only idea, or it's the necessarily, you know, the best possible idea that could ever be out there. We acknowledge the fact that, you know, in 3 months we might have come up with something different, but you know, where we are at that particular moment, and that's what it is, and we can accept that, and we can drive that collectively. The other is the idea of concept and narrative versus taste, and this is something we talk a fair amount about in the office, and it really is about how some people design versus how other people design. And to be honest, there's times when I struggle with this concept, and it's not because I don't agree with it. It's because I design one way that's oftentimes different than the way other people design, and I accept that. And I don't expect everybody to do it the way I do it, the way I don't expect to everybody to sort of, or I don't think anybody expects me to change and do it the way they do, but creating a concept and a narrative that's strong, that a team can get behind and buy into, is crucial to allowing the process to move quickly. Because one of the things that we've learned through, in this collaboration, is that things can go slower. You get more people involved earlier on, it takes more time, you have more staff, you're burning more fee, it's less, I don't want to say less productive, it's more productive, but it's messier. And so, trying to get clarity sooner, and not making it about, I like this because that's my opinion. Now that doesn't take into account experience and knowledge based on time being in the office, or based on budgets and all that. That's sort of fact-based opinion that sort of falls into decision making. But rather than just I like this or I don't like that, it's trying to find a thread and a narrative that the client can buy into, but also the team can buy into. And then thirdly, it's production as conversation versus production as presentation. So we try to keep a very sort of fluid process. And when we moved into our new office, it was crucial for us to have pin-up space everywhere, at desks, in multiple locations throughout the office, in formal presentation areas, in less formal areas. But we sort of filled our office with pin-up space. Of course, we moved home and we quickly had to find a substitute for that, which has become concept board, which I don't know if folks are familiar with, but it's sort of a whiteboard on the web. It's a great tool for us. We use it with clients, we use it internally, and it becomes about getting more done to push the design forward, rather than just spending so much time creating presentation graphics or renderings. All that happens, but it happens at particular moments, and we're not worried about what us as individuals think about what we're presenting and how dirty it is or messy. And even clients, if they can buy into that process as well, is helpful to move things along. So some of the benefits of collaboration, I think, are usually fairly self-evident, but at different levels, from the individual to the community. It's about well-being and resilience, and understanding that vulnerability can be a strength in the process, both I think in our greater field of architecture and as individuals, but inquiry as design, and asking questions and getting answers, and really sort of drawing out from clients and from neighborhoods and communities. These are just some of our observations of benefits, but it's hard to put a sort of just a list of all of them together. So moving on to our project work, and how all of this sort of relates, and where this collaboration falls into our projects. I'm going to go through, I think there's 6 projects that I have here, and but we've kind of found some slices of collaboration that we've broken apart, everything from sort of site and establishing partnerships to realized projects, to really working a collaborative design vision with a client, whether that's brand identity or what, or goals, and craft, and creating opportunities with staff and craftspeople that are local or national. And then, of course, sustainability and innovation are crucial to that. And then just internal. Sometimes it's just about having fun. And so we're going to go through a series of projects that tries to hit on that. And I'm going to give some of the specifics about the projects, but also try to tell a few stories about each one that are probably a little bit more personal to me, in ways that I saw the project, things that happened in the project. And these are all projects that I felt like I was pretty integral to. They're also sort of set up in a timeline. And so we're going to start with a project that we actually finished before the transition, and sort of go through to a newer project that's actually still under construction, and talk a little bit about sort of how that evolution relates to the work we've done as well. So this project is called One North. It was completed in 2015. It's a office building, essentially over ground floor retail. our project, or our portion of the project, is 2 buildings. What you can see in the orange cedar on the foreground, and then on the right in the background, that are centered or surrounding a common courtyard. So it's about a 85,000 square foot project total between our 2 buildings. One, and they're about equal in size. One spread over 5 stories on the west side that we're seeing here, and the one in the background over 4 stories on the east side. But it's a project that came to us through a client that we had worked with previously on a house project for him. And he's an environmental lawyer. He has pretty high standards for sustainability goals that we put into practice on a vacation or a second home for him. And then this was an opportunity to take that to a larger scale, and also to take away, to be honest with you, all of the sort of certification parts of that, and take the knowledge that we had from the house and utilize that and the costs of all the certifications and put it into the building. So we talk about this being a highly sustainable project. There's no certifications to really back that up, because he didn't feel like that was necessary. He wasn't trying to prove a point. He was trying to make an efficient and a resilient building that also tied well into the community. So this project is located in a neighborhood that's still gentrifying. It's on the Williams and Vancouver corridor in North Portland, which is a historically African-American neighborhood that has changed a lot over time, and started changing 40 years ago, to be honest with you, through a variety of projects and purchasing of land and that. So this project, as it came about, was originally a piece of land that was owned by a different developer who's also an architect, and actually created the 3rd building that sort of creates this courtyard on the upper portion of this image. And he sold to our developer, and then we sort of collaborated to create this courtyard space. And the idea was that our client was, in order to sort of create or do something that he thought could give something back to the community, was to create space that the community could utilize. So this courtyard space, as I said, is about 14,000 square feet. And so that 14,000 square feet takes away a lot of buildable area from an office building that could be renting to different businesses, and obviously have the income from that. And so he gave back to the neighborhood by creating this community space that can be utilized by anyone. There's no security fencing it off or enclosing it or restricting the use of that. They have some community events out there in the summer months, and it's utilized both not just by the members of the office building surrounding it, but by the rest of the community as well. So just quickly on some of the sort of the sustainability sort of measures, the building was designed to perform 50% more efficiently than a typical new building in Oregon, so exceeding code by quite a bit. Most of that comes through a great deal of insulation and energy efficiency in the envelope. So some exterior shading on the south facade, both in the apertures, but also just the depth of the south facade that we can see here along Fremont. And then obviously the photovoltaics on the roof, a below slab insulation, highly efficient VRF system within the building, and then some highly local, sustainably sourced wood siding that was sort of hand selected, and we worked with a local group to find a supplier for that wood, that we could track it from the tree that it was cut from to the milling procedures and drying to the site. So as I mentioned sort of the larger team dynamic. So with 2 developers and 2 architects, we worked together to sort of really focus on this courtyard space and what it could become. And it became crucial to obviously forming the buildings around that space. one of the aspects, and actually I'm going to go back a slide, which I hate to do, but I'm going to. But on the upper right, you can see what is a local church in the neighborhood. That church is an old grocery store that was converted probably 20 plus years ago to a local church. It's a church whose community has essentially moved away from the neighborhood, and the church transitioned from being focused on having a congregation that was coming to church, to their facility all the time, to a congregation that was joining them via live stream. And so they've actually created a TV studio in their building. And one of the first things that the developer did, and we did as a team, was approach them and try to understand what they needed. And so if this project was going to happen, or projects were going to happen on this site, even before we knew whether it was office or housing or what they could use. And I think oftentimes people go into that assumption of like, well, give me some community space and let me use the courtyard. And the first thing they said to us is, we need money. We need to be able to support the growth of reaching our constituents, and we need to be able to sort of create a better environment to create for the studio, and we need money to survive. And so one of the things that they did was create a very simple agreement to rent parking, and then allowed this project, the One North project, to limit the amount of parking provided, and be able to rent that parking from the adjacent property, and then provide them with the income that they needed for a parking lot that they were underutilizing. So there was never a, hey, let us buy you out and like move you out of here. It was, what do you need? Now, if they came in and said, we want to leave, then I'm sure that developer would have considered that, but they didn't want to. And there was really no conversation around that, but they found a way to support them as an organization. So, but as I mentioned, internally, we also had some of our own dynamics in Holst going on, where this was one of those projects where, it was very much a 2 or 3 people. And I think on this one, it was really just 2, myself and one of the previous partners, who created designs that in vacuums in some degree, that were then presented to the client as very much a, this is my scheme, this is my scheme. And I'll be very frank, my scheme didn't win. And that's hard for me to admit, though it's a great learning experience at the time, but it also made me realize some of the things that were happening that I didn't enjoy in the company at the time. And so that really informed how we could evolve when transition and leadership change occurred, and how we could function differently. So, and I'll say, we got an amazing project, and the client chose the right project of the ones presented to him, and I'm really proud and excited of the project, even though it wasn't my initial design. And part of my pride comes from the fact that we acted as more than an architect, in which we often do, or sometimes do, on projects where, this was a project where we also brought, where we also brought a tenant to the project. So this is the interior of the east building, the 4-story building, that's occupied by a company called Instrument. They're a local digital creative agency that we had been working with previously on the space that they had been in. They had contacted us. We talked to them about their space that they had, which was an amazing, about 6,000, maybe 7,000 square foot old warehouse. It had about 35-foot ceilings in this vaulted space with a big crane bay down the middle of it. It was just gorgeous space, light coming in from east and west up high, but it was fully uninsulated. The walls leaked. They had spent a tremendous amount of money putting a mechanical system into the space that they were leasing. And they didn't really, they weren't necessarily legal from a zoning code perspective as far as their use of the space. And so we talked to them for a while. When we realized some of their issues, we kind of said, hey, we can't really help you anymore, because you seem adamant about staying. We think it's silly for you to put that kind of money into this space, and you're not really legal. And you seem to think that there's a way to become legal through your your landlord seemed to think he could make them legal. So we sort of parted ways and said, okay, great. Well, thanks. You know, if I can help you in the future or there's something else that comes up, let me know. And so we parted ways. And then a few months later, we were working on this project. It had become an office building. And I happened to run into one of the owners of Instrument at lunch, and we were talking, and I asked how it was going, and he said, it's not going well. We're hitting the winter and the building's leaking and nothing's happening like we thought. And, you know, we're starting to look for other space. And I said, you are? Well, great. I got a building. Let's talk. And so we had lunch, and we talked to them about this opportunity. And the opportunity, or what they were looking for, was a bit of a unicorn in Portland, which was a 40,000 square foot or 35,000 square foot open warehouse where they could see from one side of the building to the other. They wanted to take their 7,000 square foot space and turn it into 30,000 square feet with that big open office space. And they were looking in this neighborhood, but the reality is those buildings don't really exist in Portland anymore, and they didn't at the time. And anybody that had one was probably going to redevelop that full block site into something more. And so they were hesitant at first about this project because it would require them to go over multiple floors, and they were pretty hesitant to that. But right off the bat, we were able to show them some interior sort of idea of the space through some renderings and some really rough modeling, and get them to buy in. And they quickly sort of understood the possibilities, and they jumped on board, and they made the project happen by signing a lease that was still several years out at a rate that wasn't, couldn't be found in the neighborhood at the time. And so, we brought that to the table and to the team. And since then, they've actually expanded. They've taken several floors of the West building as well. And so they've become a pretty integral part to the whole development over there at Illinois. So the next project I'm going to talk about is for a small company you all might know called Nike. They're a local company. I think they're international. And I joke about that because they, for a long time, have sort of governed design in Portland, or ruled it in a way where a lot of individuals come to Portland because of Nike. A lot of companies are established because of Nike. A lot of people do work with Nike and do great things with them, and have great opportunities. So, and I also bring it up because personally, Nike's really the reason that I'm in Portland. My buddy Aaron, who's here, I think, still on the call, was here working at Nike. Told me that Portland was great and suggested, and I said, oh, great. I'm going to move out next week. And I had to leave the position I was in. And I moved to Portland without really any idea of what I was going to do or where I was going to work. But I still sort of look at Nike as the reason that I'm where I'm at. And I'm appreciative for that because I'm pretty happy with where I'm at. So, back in 2016, right before the transition, we got an opportunity to propose for a project. And it wasn't the first time we had talked to Nike about work. We hadn't talked to them. We had talked to them several times in a not very sort of like, not in a way that we weren't super excited about. We had some apprehension about working with Nike, about some things we had heard, and about what it was like to potentially work with some of the people there. And we had interviewed for some other work and it didn't go well. And then this opportunity came up in 2016, and it was to renovate one of their first buildings on campus called the Dan Fouts building. Dan Fouts was a professional football player, also played at the University of Oregon. So Nike had names and still does most of their buildings after some of their athletes. And so this was the Dan Fouts building. He went to the U of O. Nike's connected to the U of O in a very strong way. So this is a pretty big project for them. It was not only renovating the Dan Fouts building, but it was one of the first buildings on campus, but also going to sort of set the stage for future renovations there on campus, as they have a series of buildings that are from the same time period that all needed renovation. So like I said, we proposed on it in 2016. Myself and one of the previous partners, I kind of did a lot of the RFP work by myself. We went into the interview and I felt like I was answering all the questions and sort of leading that. And lo and behold, we got selected to work on it. I was rather shocked, to be honest with you, but excited and a little nervous. We started working on it for a few months and then actually stopped abruptly at one point as things can happen sometimes. The project evolved, more people were brought on, different partners were brought on, including some sort of collaborative work environment companies that were going to design the space for them and sort of run it and manage. And we sort of stepped aside and didn't think that it was necessary for us to be involved and weren't really interested in being in the middle of that. So we politely sort of stepped away. A few months went by, the transition happened, and then in early 2017, we got a call back saying that wasn't working. Please come back and join the team again. We're back to the original dynamic, and we want you back on board. And by the way, the schedule hasn't changed. And we said, okay, great, let's do it. We joined back up. So the project got completed in 2018. It's about 88,000 square feet of building. And it went from a very sort of enclosed office building to a very open shared work environment. So what was a lot of enclosed personal offices and 8-foot or 6-foot tall cubicles to very open environment. So here's a ground floor, what they call a hub, which becomes an interactive space for all of the buildings. And so no longer do you need security identification to get into the ground floor. There's a shared experience with a cafe and multiple vendors, an area just to sort of sit down and do some work, an IT desk and other things, including some shared communities meeting space that could be rented out or utilized by the rest of campus. So it went from it's a space that I think used to house 300 people to housing about 500 in very sort of flexible environments. What it does is it reinvents one of Nike's original campus buildings into a fully flexible office space, and it sets up, as I said, it set a precedent for future renovations. Future renovations that we chose not to take part in, but others have, and from our understanding, has really sort of led to the next steps in the project. So the ground floor, as I mentioned, really opens up. This is one of those small meeting areas that they have actually right inside the entry, where it welcomes you to the building, but it brings in this sort of industrial sort of feel. And the idea was relating to the stadium. Dan in his athletic achievements were all sort of accomplished within a stadium environment. So this is sort of relating that experience of the stadium. So it was less about the individual and about just the sport of football, but it was about the experience of the place where people are going to that, but also the history of Nike and bringing those things in both material and even spatial experiences. So, of course, one of the challenges of working with a company like this, and some of the same challenges actually of working with Instrument, is you're working with a collection of another collection of designers. So although you have your ideas, you have to be very open, because your client, has experience with space design, has material, experience. And so it has to be a very collaborative experience. It's expected to be, you're expected to listen, to advise, but also to, utilize what's being provided to you to make the space to come alive. So, and so that's always a challenge, to be honest with you. And working with other designers is great because of what it can open up, but it can also be one of the biggest challenges you can have, I think, in what we do. So here you can see sort of where things become a lot more transparent. Glass that was originally sort of mirrored glass that doesn't allow views in. It was very protective of what was happening inside. On the ground floor, got changed out for very transparent glass. Pivot doors allows the inside to open up to the outside, where there's actually a man-made lake just to your right. And it allows that circulation to actually happen through the space, which is quite different than the experience of the original building. So, and it really, goes even further. And this is, like I mentioned, a community space that can be utilized by different groups. But this is a room that we're really focused on Dan's experience. And so memorabilia and history of him, down to a carpet that's sort of modeled after the field of the turf of the football field, and after a variety of studies, and the leather of the couches bring in, and the leather of the furniture of a football, sort of that whole experience, and it really being driven from two sides, from us as having a strong sense of space, and from folks at Nike having wanting to push the boundaries and really wanting to get the feeling of Nike into the experience of the space. So, the next project I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to try to speed up a little bit, apologize if I'm going slow, but is the Riviera Apartments. And this was one of our biggest projects that's been built to date. And it's a housing project on Mississippi Avenue, which is not far from One North. It's actually just down the street, maybe 6 or 7 blocks. It's a 211 apartments. It's a market rate apartments. It's about 225,000 square feet of apartments with a little bit of retail on the corner. It's sort of the terminus of a very popular street, and a very popular pedestrian street in town that has grown pretty organically over the last 10 years. But it's at the south end of it. You can see views of downtown in the left down the street. The street ends up tailing or heading down the hill after being fairly level for 20 blocks. And so that was an opportunity to allow the building to sort of react to the street, and ground floor units to be happening, but also the space to really open up to that to the street presence as well. So it's got a fairly typical array of amenities, at least what's typical for Portland: a fairly large lobby and gathering space, and an upper roof deck that looks over the city, and as well as a gym, and there's even a music room in the space, and a fitness, yoga, and a sauna, and all of the amenities that one might get in the amenities race that has been happening with market rate housing here in town. The biggest part for us, not the biggest part for collaboration, but one of the key parts, and here you can see the lobby, which is brings in a lot of wood and natural material to the lobby. But one of the aspects of the project that we were, to be honest with you, very nervous about when we started was we knew the community's sort of connection to the site. The site had been empty for quite a few years. There were some houses that had come down, I think long before I had even moved to Portland, but there was a walnut tree sort of on the very close to the corner of the site. It had become a neighborhood tree. There was a tire swing on it. It kind of became a gathering spot, and caused a lot of concern from the neighborhood when the project was happening. Now, of course, it was a tree that had sort of reached its life, and that's really hard to explain to a community that is changing. But it was coming down, whether we took it down or not, in the very near future. So we took the opportunity, and the developer really pushed or accepted, I should say, the opportunity to take that tree and to save it and to mill it and create pieces out of it that could be utilized within the lobby space. And one of the things that was really great for us while it happened, and I'll explain why it became less great for us, but our project architect at the time, who was really sort of pushing this project through, actually had come from the world of furniture craft. And so he had worked for a furniture maker just before starting at Holst. He still did that on the side. He's extremely talented. We knew it was a passion of his, but we also knew that it was pretty tough to make a living doing custom furniture here in town. And so he volunteered to make the table in the conference room, as well as I think some other small pieces out of this walnut tree. And so he was able to utilize his skill and bring that to the table. So it was a collaboration with, with him as a craftsman and just the craft in general to be able to bring that to the project. And here's that table in the conference room in the lobby. Why this became a bit of a downer for us is because soon after this, he decided that he could actually make a living doing furniture. So he decided to leave Holst and then go back to that, which we were fully supportive of. He's a great guy with a great ability and great skill, and somebody that we're looking forward to utilizing more on other projects back in his life as a furniture maker. So the next project I'm going to hit on quickly is the Seaside Convention Center. This project was actually one of the first projects that we went after and were awarded post transition. So it was a project where the four current partners really saw an opportunity for a different project type that we weren't in a community that's about an hour and a half away from Portland at the coast, and was something that we saw we could go after and sort of spread some wings and see if we could get it with our new leadership. And we took the opportunity to also bring on a collaborative partner from outside of the office, where we brought in Convergence Design out of Kansas City. They're a small office that does a lot of collaboration on this type of public assembly space. And so we felt it was the perfect mix of experience that was very specific to this project type, along with our design experience and some experience that we had at the coast, and to bring it to this project. And we were lucky enough to be awarded the project and then get to work on it. So it was completed in October of 2019. It's about 54,000 square foot of total building area. Most of that we impacted with the renovation. And of course that the collaboration with an outside partner, and it wasn't something that we hadn't done before, but it was definitely something I hadn't done a lot of. It really sort of brings in that, what I talked about earlier about the suppression of your own ego, and you're bringing somebody else in with more experience, and then you have to be able to work with them in a way that's successful for the project, and for the environment of the team dynamic. So we were luckily able to quickly understand how that worked and work together through programming and sort of some of the layout of the initial schematic design about what we needed to bring to the project, which really was about changing a little bit of the goal that the convention center came to us with, which was expanding a couple of their rooms that they wanted to get bigger. They wanted to open it up more to the river that they're adjacent to. There's a small river that sort of leads into the ocean there, and they had half their building is on the river and a couple blocks away from the ocean, so they wanted to open up some of their meeting space. And so the first thing we told them was, well, what you really need to do is create a space that's outside of these meeting rooms and create a pre-function space that created a spine of circulation through the building, and took away a little bit of what they were looking to do originally, but provided a more usable space and a better space for those rooms that they wanted to expand. Because if we expanded them and there was no opportunity to gather outside of there, they wouldn't be any more functional. And so they agreed, and that was really came because of the experience that Convergence Design brought to the table. And so that was a key part of this project, and making this project continue to move forward, was that collaboration. So here you can sort of see on the bottom where we actually put in a new entry on the west side of the building that connected to where everybody parked for the convention center, and that actually continues all the way through the building to this entry here, that's on the east side of the building. So that's a continuous connection through there. And then also provides a little bit of identity to the building. I didn't include a before image, which I probably should have, but there wasn't much to this building. It didn't have an identity. and people didn't have any clue as to what it was. And so this provides a bit of a of identity within Seaside, so it's visible from different parts of the downtown strip, which is about a block away from the convention center. And most of the people prior to the project that you might ask if they knew that there was a convention center in town had no clue that there was a convention center in Seaside. So, but it's crucial to making what is a seaside, no pun intended, but a seaside town that is very much sort of based on people coming in the summertime when the weather's beautiful, to how do you survive during the winter months. And this convention center provides an opportunity for that. So it's a pretty big part of town because of the events that it can bring to town when the weather isn't perfect. So it needed some prominence, and we were able to provide that to the building. So, and with that, we kind of utilized a metal panel that you can see in the images, where it's sort of just a pretty simple sort of variation of a 6-inch panel and a 12-inch chevron panel to create this striations that we think sort of reflects a little bit of what can happen when a lot of the residential buildings in town will naturally silver on their cedar. This sort of brings that sort of dynamic of the facade into play in a much more durable material that's more reflective of the convention center itself. Here's an image of the interior, where you can see this is the new lobby, and then that stair is a new stair that connects upstairs to where more meeting spaces are, and then to the right and left is this gathering space outside of the larger community, or the larger gallery spaces. And here is the one of the meeting rooms that really opened up to the river on the east side, and really was the original point of the whole project, though that expanded. So last project to briefly talk about is DePaul Treatment Center. This is a project where I think the collaboration really comes in several instances. This project's currently under construction with a plan to open in August or September, I believe. Now it's a about 53,000 square foot project that houses a fairly sort of diverse program that is required for the treatment center. It includes an outpatient facility for folks that can come on a daily basis for meetings or counseling, provides residential services. So there's 70 beds for short-term stay up to about 3 months where folks will actually live in the facility, provides a detox environment where there's, I think, 24 beds for withdrawal management. And then, of course, parking for all of that as well, which I think we all know sometimes drives how our buildings can operate. But this project, because of its requirements for both city, sort of some pretty strict city regulatory requirements, and then the program from the client, took some pretty sort of deft maneuvering of program and organization. And this is on a portion of town that's on the east side of town where the need for this program is very high, but the pedestrian experience on the street is pretty minimal. But the zoning code requires pedestrian experience and a connection to the street, an entry, visibility into the building, and we have a program that's highly secretive and needs confidentiality, and so it very much became about how we blend those things and how we achieve that. And one of the first things that we were able to do was create an outdoor courtyard space that you can sort of see at the top portion of this building that the building encompasses. And so the outdoor space is, I think at this point, about this big as the footprint of the indoor enclosed space on the ground floor. And we created the transparency that's required while creating enough separation of program to create an environment that works for the client. So in conceptually and narratively, as we were talking about, we struggled to how to make this sort of two-story low-rise building that's 200 plus feet long sort of feel like it has a presence in the neighborhood, that, in all honesty, has a Home Depot behind it and the same sort of tilt-up warehouse across the street, was to actually get it to blend more with the residential neighborhood that's to the east and to the south. And so we took that roof form that we're familiar with from residential, and we used that to sort of bring this idea of a singular roof that can encompass and unite all of this different program under one roof. And so that became a driving force for the design, and you know, a pretty clear sort of approach to where things were going. So, you know, I'll show an actual photo that sort of resembles this view. Is so why I kind of bring it up. But you can see that singular roof across the two-story building. It's all cedar siding that brings some warmth to the project in a neighborhood that needs it, and a courtyard that really becomes the livelihood of the building. And so we worked with a local landscape architecture firm called Ground Workshop. They're actually a firm was started by an individual whose wife actually used to work with us, and we got to know him through that. And when he was at another firm, he started his own office just about when this project was happening. So we were able to convince the developer and the client that we thought he brought what the project needed to the table to sort of make this outdoor space, you know, an inviting and you know, exciting place to be, while also being a serene environment for folks that were going either through recovery or were coming for treatment on an outpatient basis, or for the folks who were working there and having to sort of deal with the stresses of working in those environments on a daily basis. So, you know, the renderings, I don't think do it what will be their justice, but it's what we have to share. Here's quickly an interior view that takes into account trauma-informed design principles of materiality and openness and clarity and warmth. And you can kind of see a connection to the south, and that also then connects on the right-hand side to the courtyard space. So the lobby sort of becomes this flow-through space from the outside to the courtyard as well. So here is here's a view from just a week or two ago, where actually the mayor was on site. I'm not in this picture, but the CEO of DePaul, Marie, is on the right. The mayor's in the middle. He's fairly proud of the project as well. And you can kind of see that view of the roof form taking shape. And so we're excited to see this come about in the fall. And the other thing I think to hit on quickly is this was one of the projects that was really the beginning of our sort of messy design process, where we opened it up to more people in the office. We had a very sort of deliberate design process that included, I think there was 8 people at times, sort of just doing schematic design work, and coming to all the meetings, working together, and it was messy. It was messy as all hell, to be honest. It showed me a lot of ways where I needed to improve as a leader and improve as a designer and as a communicator. It also helped spur on the need for our CDP meetings, and I'm not afraid to admit that. But it was you know, there was a lot of fear into how we do this project type we had never done before, how we do it with all these new people, how we do it collaboratively, and at times it didn't work well. But eventually we got to the point where we had sort of an idea that's very close to where we are now, where we had the roof form and we had a building, and in the team, I think, saw like, hey, you know what, we can all buy into this, and we all developed that, and everybody was part of those conversations. But then that narrative became sort of the moment where the team sort of gelled and allowed us to continue moving forward. So with that, just a couple more slides. And this is really about where I talked about collaboration for fun. So one of the things that we try to encourage the office to do is find opportunities where they can collaborate outside of the leadership team. this is a project called Portland Winter Lights Festival. It's a project that we've been involved with for the last 4 years, where different designers or firms create these installations that then are all shared over one weekend in the middle of the winter, where it can be cold and rainy and nasty out, but get a lot of people outside to interact with these light installations. And so there's sort of a progression from the first one we did on the left to the one we did a couple years ago. This year's was a little different because of COVID. They didn't have them out in the street, so it was more like in your office from the windows, and so I don't have a good picture of that yet. But these are 3 installations, and they all explored a collaboration in a different way, both internally, like in how those teams had to gel amongst themselves without leadership directing them, but also how they worked with outside collaborators. So the one in the middle, they found both a local fabricator for some plexi panels. And then they worked with a sound engineer to sort of set up a light system that worked based on sound amongst that. So there was music playing and the lights were sort of going with the music. And then on the right, they worked with another fabricator, a local company called Good Mod, that we utilized for some custom furniture, both in our office and on other projects, to CNC some supports for these fabric pieces that they formed actually in our old office that happened to be unavailable while we moved from one office to another. They were able to utilize our old office to sort of stage the project, and you can see some of it in some of these pictures, and then set it up on site. It was pretty great. They experimented with different resins and ways to form things, and became a great thing. Here it is installed, and it was pretty bitterly cold that weekend, but I even got my 8-year-old son at the time to come out and enjoy it with me in the cold and rain, and he had a great time. So I think that says a lot about that. And so, just to sort of wrap things up, this is our vision statement in a nutshell. But what it comes down to for us, and I think some of the things that we see from as we get more and more into sort of understanding the collaboration in the office, it's about how that relates to projects, and also how they are very similar in things that we had maybe tried to do for a long time on projects were starting to happen as a collective, just in how we interacted, and ways that we've always talked about projects being individual projects, and we approach each one as a singular entity, and clients are different, and locations are different, and we don't try to reuse solutions. It was very much the same way with how we sort of interact and communicate with staff. Everybody's an individual. We need to treat them that way. We need to be able to listen and provide what people need, that works with how we work as a company, and then those things work together and create a whole that's greater than the sum of its parts. I'll also be honest, and it's not lost on me that middle-aged, white, cis male was asked to do a presentation that was really focused on diversity and equity. But for us, we've got other strategies that we're trying to engage and expand parts of that in the office. But as a foundational element, we need to have an environment where people want to come into and feel like they can come in and be safe in that environment. So that's what we've been, that's what we're proud of sort of establishing as we continue and grow into supporting organizations like the Emerging Leaders Institute here in town, where we get interns. We had an intern last year. We had another intern coming this year, but also the local NOMA chapter of NOMA PDX. As well as consultants and vendors and everything we do to try to expand ourselves as a firm and as individuals. With that said, I'm done. I'm done talking. We have some prompts sometimes that help, but it looks like there might be some questions out there that I'll let Nathan field. So thanks for having us.
That's great. Thank you so much, Kevin. And so everybody in the audience, you're welcome to chime in with a question or a comment for Kevin. And while everybody gets warmed up, I'll just say that I think the kind of thinking and the depth of thinking about process and how to work together really strikes me as an enlightened and really powerful way to practice architecture. But it's, for other disciplines trying to achieve a common goal as well. Just really striking. And also really appreciate the openness with which you presented your work with us tonight, Kevin. It was really remarkable. I have a question about, the origins of that kind of self-reflective approach to collaboration. Was that like a shared vision that evolved among the 4 new owners? Are you natural collaborators amongst yourselves? Or yeah.
That's a good question. I have to be, I'll continue to be honest with that. I'm not a natural collaborator by any means. I think that it comes about from a few things. One is, when we were younger, I think the firm was different. It was smaller. There was different opportunities. We felt pretty engaged, even though it wasn't it was a different type of engagement in some ways. As we grew, that seemed to change, where people were doing much more sort of individual tasks or a bit more pigeonholed. We didn't really like seeing that as just a collective unit. At the same time, when we did transition, we had more authority over how we were going to function. Initially, that wasn't the first one of the things we talked about when we said, hey, the 4 of us are going to start owning this company. How are we going to do it? That wasn't at the forefront. It took, I would say, a good year for that to come to the forefront a bit more. And it came to the forefront more because it wasn't working well. I have no problem admitting that I was a bit more controlling. I wanted to have a hand in more things. I felt like I was just getting an opportunity to be more involved in different types of projects. I didn't want to lose that. I felt a lot of ownership over it, and I felt like we were coming from a firm that had a very strong design lead, and I think everybody knew that. Even though it wasn't like one person did all of the design work, but there was a clarity to some of that, and there was an expectation of like, well, how the hell are you going to do that the same way? Like, can you fill those shoes? And I was very honest with myself from the beginning that I couldn't. I knew myself. I knew that wasn't my abilities weren't suited to that. Like I worked a different way, and I just, to be honest, didn't have the same level of creativity, and I'm okay with that. Now, it took some prodding, and it took some messiness and some difficult conversations from staff to my partners and my partners to me, to acknowledge that. And as soon as I did, and accepted that and said, you know what, I don't need to project anything on anybody else. I don't need to do it my way. I can let that go. It became a lot more comfortable for me. I no longer felt like I was faking anything. I felt like I was just part of the group. And I think that the staff saw that. I think my partners saw that. I think our work is reflective of that now. And I think that the project work, it's a lot easier to feel like they're maintaining the level of design quality that we had been known for in that way, without the pressure of like, I've got to do it myself, which is something I never wanted to do. In fact, I never saw myself as owning an architecture firm. I'm not an architect. And so I never even saw myself in this position. I never really wanted to be in this position. But when the opportunity arose, I felt like I couldn't turn it down. So, and then you change, you grow, and you change, and you get better, hopefully.
Yeah. Great. So maybe I'll ask one more, which is maybe a little broader, but given we're in an architecture school, the one that you attended, I wondered if you could reflect with us a bit about how you see the education of young architects today, and what kind of skills and values and modes of work and states of mind we should be focused on in teaching our students in today's moment in time, from your perspective?
That's a great question too. I don't have as much connection to the academic world as I probably should these days, to be honest. I taught a studio a few years back, and I occasionally get involved with some reviews. But for me, it's something that it's a little bit more of a lesson that I learned outside of architecture school a long time ago, and even as I was going into college, which was, it's more about doing a little bit of everything and not focusing on one thing or another. And I think that's something that's sort of allowed me to get to where I'm at. I've always been a bit of a generalist, so with maybe some focus on certain things. But I think if it in my perception of my education was very competitive, and I loved it in some ways. I loved the people that I got to go to school with. I loved competing because I had a natural sort of competitive aspect to me through my youth. But I also knew that I didn't win a lot of those competitions. And so that was like, gosh, what does that mean for me? Does that mean I shouldn't be doing this? And it actually made me question when I was coming out of school, like, am I going to be an architect? Am I going into the profession? And even to the point of like my last semester, like thinking I was going to drop out because I didn't see the point of getting my degree in 3 months because I wasn't going to use it. So what the heck? And luckily, a good friend talked me out of that. And that was great. At the same time, I've seen the little bit of sort of connection I have to some of the programs here in town. Portland State as well as University of Oregon both have programs in Portland. They're very collaborative environments. I think the students are learning how to work together a lot more. I think that's great. I think it's really helpful for when you're coming out of school. I also think it takes a little bit of the pressure off of your own abilities at times, where people can rely on the team. And I never like to see one person doing more than others and other people sort of, not doing, pulling their weight. And so I think that through the education process, you need both of those. I think people need to feel the pressure of doing things on their own and learning that way, and even failing to grow, and then how to work together and how to do it in a good way. So there's some people who take that environment and try to rule it, and then sort of be the domineering presence in that, and they need to learn how to sit back and let others sort of take the reins. And so there's great opportunity, I think, with both, and it needs to be a combination. I think if it's one or the other, there's probably a disservice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is that a good non-answer?
That's great. No. Maybe I'll ask you just maybe one more. And there are a bunch of comments in the thank yous and shout outs in the questions answer boxes. But I think I'd be interested to hear you also just speculate a bit with us about what your hopes might be for the future of the profession, and maybe projecting through your own work, which is already so thoughtful in so many dimensions. But how you see hopes for what we do in the future.
I think my biggest hope is really, in opening up of the profession, to be honest with you. I think we have done a pretty great job of equity when it comes to male-female sort of dynamic. A little bit of diversity, but honestly not nearly enough. And I think that our profession struggles with that. I think it struggles with it both in the who gets into the profession, who has knowledge of the profession, before they're going for education, and then who has the resources to do certain things, and whether that's unpaid internships, which are something we've never participated in, or I think are very detrimental to our environment, to organizations like NOMA and like the ELI that are really focusing on diversity and bringing awareness, like bringing those people to the table, and then bringing that into the company to have a voice, and in bringing their experiences to the table, because that's what it comes down to, of getting the most thought out there is there's different mindsets, and it's hard to say what those differences are going to be. And I know that there's a lot of dialogue about that. There's dialogue about colonialism and white European space design and all of that. And there's not a lot of answers as to what that means, I think, and how you do it differently. And I don't think we can really know until there's more people at the table who are involved. And so for us, it's about, it's about doing more of that and being more proactive in how we can do that, and not being silent about it and not pretending like we've achieved anything, because we haven't. That's why it's hard sometimes to talk about these things. It's like I can talk about where we are, I can talk about what we've done, but I can also acknowledge the fact that we're not really where we want to be. I'm happy with what we've done, don't get me wrong, and I think you need a certain amount of ability to sort of sell what you do and how you do it, and market yourselves. I'm not that person necessarily in my office, and people know that. I'm very self-reflective in much more of a negative way about what we can do better and what I can do better, and I'm not happy until those things happen. So I don't know, I'll probably never be happy with it, but as long as we keep working towards those goals, then I'll be happy with that. But I don't have a lot of, I don't have goals for the profession as far as what we create. I never look at, gosh, I'd love to do this project type, and I'd love to, go do international work and do this thing and be more well known and do more of this. In fact, I don't want to do more of that. But for me, it's that daily interaction. Who's there?
Well, this has been really wonderful, Kevin. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. And there's a whole bunch of comments there for you in Q&A that we can read after. But on behalf of everybody at the school, really great to see your work, and thank you so much.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me, and I appreciate everybody who stuck around, and I appreciate the opportunity. So good to see some names on there that I haven't seen in a long time too. So thanks y'all for coming.
Okay.
Okay.